Tonight on Primetime, a rare diplomatic moment between Washington and Havana as CIA Chief John Ratcliffe holds talks in Cuba amid a worsening energy crisis on the island. The U.S. says future cooperation depends on major reforms, while Cuba accuses Washington of deepening the crisis through sanctions. So, are we seeing the start of a reset in relations? Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Mioch. The United States and Cuba have held talks in Havana amid worsening tensions and a deepening energy crisis on the island. CIA Director John Ratcliffe carried a message from President Donald Trump linking future cooperation to fundamental changes by the Cuban government.
CIA Director John Ratcliffe met senior Cuban officials in Havana on Thursday during a rare visit by a top U.S. intelligence chief to the island. According to a CIA official, Ratcliffe delivered a message from President Donald Trump saying Washington would seriously engage with Cuba on economic and security issues only if Havana makes fundamental changes. The Cuban government confirmed the talks and said both sides discussed possible cooperation between law enforcement agencies on regional and international security. Cuban officials also told the U.S. delegation that Cuba does not pose a threat to American national security. The meetings came as Cuba faces severe fuel shortages and rolling blackouts. On Wednesday, the United States offered $100 million in direct aid, while Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel said Havana was open to reviewing the proposal if it followed international humanitarian standards. Relations between the two countries have remained strained for decades, with Washington demanding political and economic reforms from Cuba, while Havana accuses the United States of worsening the island's crisis through sanctions and the long-running trade embargo.
For decades now, relations between Washington and Havana have been shaped by distrust, sanctions, and political confrontation. Amid Cuba's deepening economic crisis, both sides appear to be cautiously reopening channels of communication. Joining us now from New York to unpack the significance of these talks is John Kavolic, president of the U.S.-Cuba Trade and Economic Council and senior editor at the Issue Insight. John, welcome. Always great to have you on the show. First off, how unusual is it to see the chief of the CIA in Havana, especially amid the U.S. blockade of Cuba?
And it is one of those optical moments that you don't expect. The last time in succession, last several weeks, we had a previous delegation from the State Department that was there on a government aircraft. Now we have Director Ratcliffe on a government aircraft. Last time we had that many government aircraft in Cuba was when President Obama visited Cuba a decade ago. So it's a big optic, but it shouldn't surprise anyone, because the Trump administration, if you look at them the first term and you look at them the second term, they're all about progression. And they will say a lot, and it'll be very bellicose, but they're about progression in terms of having higher and higher officials of the U.S. meet with higher and higher officials of Cuba. And that's what's happening. So it absolutely is progress.
Well, the blockade remains in place, and Cuba has long condemned it, saying it does not pose any threat to U.S. national security. Given the U.S. removal of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and tariff threats to Mexico if it exports fuel to the island, is the United States changing its strategy and its approach to the communist government in Cuba?
There's absolutely no question that by abducting Nicolas Maduro, the Trump administration, they hit Venezuela, but the bank shot, if you're looking at playing pool, the bank shot hit Cuba in a way that no one had ever hit Cuba before. And that was an immediate cessation of funds into Cuba and also oil and all their energy products into Cuba. And there was no one to replace them, which is normally what Cuba finds. It'll say, okay, we've got this problem, but someone else will bail us out of it. This time, no one is there to bail them out. And so we've watched this continuation of a downward spiral in terms of the Cuban economy. But we also have a collision of politics and legalities. And the Cubans call it a blockade. The U.S. law calls it an embargo. But last year, U.S. commercial activity, this isn't donations, this is products that's sold into Cuba, was almost $800 million. And the majority of that is food products and agricultural products, and also products for the reemerging private sector. So there is commerce going on, but the Cuban private sector isn't something the Cuban government really wants. And the Trump administration wants to support the Cuban private sector. So you have these colliding narratives. But we are slowly moving toward Cuba accepting more of what President Trump says he wants, and for President Trump accepting less of what he is saying he wants from Cuba. But so they're both sort of backing into one another.
We've heard a dramatic message from Cuba's energy minister a couple of days ago. He said the island ran out of diesel and fuel oil. Some neighborhoods in Havana reportedly go up to 22 hours a day without power, and there have been some scattered protests there. Is the Cuban government now more vulnerable than ever?
They're absolutely vulnerable, but at the same time, they're adaptable. And they've had 67 years to continue to adapt to United States policies, United States regulations, United States statutes. And, I sometimes use an analogy that look at a small boat and it's constantly tipping port to starboard, so left to right. Water's coming in on both sides, but they're bailing it out faster than it's going to sink the boat. So they're constantly teetering, so they're never really happy, but they never collapse. And that's sort of where we are with the Cuban government. The Trump administration went in initially, which is we want regime change. We want the political system to change. We need communism out. But slowly that has changed. And Secretary of State Rubio said it best, where he said, look, there's what we want to see in Cuba, and then there's what we can likely achieve. And there's a great distance between the two, and we recognize that. And the easiest pathway is first commercially, economically, and financially. And that's pretty much where the Trump administration is going. And for the Cuban government, that's the easiest path for them to accept, because it doesn't deal with the structure of the government. And for President Trump, he doesn't care what type of government a country has. They can be communist, dictatorship, junta, authoritarian, monarchy, democracy. He really doesn't care. All he does care about is that government has an ability to manage its economy. And by that, he means you have the ability to purchase products and services from the United States. So as long as you can do that, he's good with you. And in Cuba's case, the potential is to be able to get back to that place. But this is going to continue to unravel during the next months. There are some benchmarks we're watching. The two Supreme Court cases that the Trump administration is supporting about suing for traffickers in Cuba, that their assets were used. Those will happen in May or in June. The G7, President Trump will be in France. Prime Minister Carney from Canada will be there, and a Canadian company just pulled out of Cuba because of sanctions. Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain will be there, and the U.S. is going after a company in Spain, Melia, the hotel company. And then you've got the indictment of Raul Castro that's expected. He's not going to be extradited from Cuba. He's never going to see a U.S. courtroom. It's sort of performative. It's political because there are 1.6 million people of Cuban descent in Florida. So we're sort of watching to see how this plays out. But the big one is Iran. And the war with Iran is very much a focus of the Cubans. The Cubans are watching to see, how does President Trump define winning with Iran? Because that helps it define how we're going to, engage with them. And of course, they're watching Venezuela to see how that continues to unroll.
Many variables there, John, but as things stand, how likely would you say it is for the U.S. to get these quote-unquote fundamental changes it's asking for in return for aid and the type of business opportunities you've mentioned?
Yeah, the $100 million, that's going to be delivered. There's a performance that goes through that, which is, the U.S. offers, the Cubans are indignant about it because, we wouldn't need it if you people didn't sanction us and didn't harm us. And then the U.S. usually does stuff like print on all the boxes, courtesy of American people for freedom and democracy. And so the Cubans get pretty upset about that. But I think they're going to work it out so the product will go into Cuba, probably, primarily through the Catholic Church. The word, you used a good word, which is fundamental, because neither side is going to get what they fundamentally want. They're going to get what is the path of least resistance so they can get something. The government of Cuba needs to survive. Its people need to survive. So they're going to need to compromise more to get some help urgently. Then they're going to try to slow walk whatever they agree to, because that's their modus operandi. But eventually, they're going to continue to change. And for Trump administration, they're not going to get everything they want, as bombastic and regime change and all that sort of stuff. But they're going to get a Cuba that is on a good trajectory. And that's where we get to the last item on our list that we're watching. And that is, the bigger the deal that comes out, so the closer it is to those fundamentals, the more likely we may see the president of Cuba at the White House, signing a document using one of President Trump's big presidential Sharpies, because for President Trump, it would be an enormous event, and he'd have enormous satisfaction saying, 67 years, President Eisenhower began this thing, and Trump ended it. Not Obama, not Biden, not Clinton, not Bush, not Reagan, not Kennedy, not Nixon, not Johnson, right? But Trump did this. And see, I'm showing the document and I got my big Sharpie. I absolutely think that people should be prepared for, particularly in South Florida where they're not going to be happy about it. They need to be prepared for the president of Cuba being inside the White House.
John, do you think it's vital for Havana to get any sort of deal here, but also save face in a way?
Well, it's vital for them to get relief. Saving face is it's negotiable, and it all depends on the given day of the week. What does saving face mean? Because saving face on Monday might mean different than saving face on Wednesday. But this is tough for them, and that's why they're going to. I'm not going to call it a red line, because people use red lines too often with government discussions, and they're always moving. So I'll say that the current line of discussion is sort of bumps up against a soft wall, which is Cuba's Communist Party, Cuba's communist government. And Secretary of State Rubio has said, look, we're okay with communists, just not stupid communists. The Chinese are communists, they're not stupid. Vietnamese are communists, they're not stupid. But we're not so certain that the Cubans are capable of not being stupid. But we'd like to be proven wrong. And so I think the Cubans see that as the out, which is we'll do what we need to do commercially, economically, and financially, and then we will try sort of the slow walk to the rest. They'll do some release of some more prisoners. The U.S. will have an agreement to send more Cubans that are supposed to be deported back to Cuba. But it's going to be a very, very delicate dance over the next 6 months. But I said a lot of this is going to have to do with how the U.S. Israel-Iran war has some sort of finality, and then how the situation continues to unravel in Venezuela. But Cuba does know, and the government of Cuba does know, there is no one coming to their rescue. And that's terrifying, because in 67 years, they've always been able to pick up the phone and get someone on the other end who will say, we'll bail you out, we'll get you through this crisis, basically to the beginning of the next one.
And in that vein, John, would a new Cuba by Trump's vision be a checkmate for China, Russia, and other actors, not only in the Caribbean, but the start of a checkmate in the whole Western Hemisphere?
Yeah, the potential is there. China does have relationships with Cuba. They have, intelligence gathering relationships. They have commercial relationships. Russia, less on the commercial, although they've been talking about things, but they haven't really done a lot. And they still have a presence there. So with China and Russia, Cuba's more about solidarity, but also Russia and China depend upon a weak Cuba, because a weak Cuba means better terms for them and worse terms for Cuba. A stronger Cuba means less inclined to accept what's going to impact Cuba's relationships with everybody else, whether it's the European Union, whether it's APEC, whether it's the G20 and the G7. So, a stronger Cuba is more desirable. For China and Russia, do they lose a lot if there is a new Cuba, or Cuba 3.0, or a Cuba 2026? They do lose some optically. It's, hey, we're supporting these people. We've been doing so for 67 years, but practically, it really doesn't mean all that much. More, it means less for Russia, because they have less of a presence in the Caribbean Sea area. A little more to China, but none of them are going to be that unprepared for a Cuba that realigns. But they do know it's going to take some time.
And finally, John, of course, we're waiting for the situation in the Middle East to be resolved one way or the other. But there are Cuba hawks in the Republican Party and in the Trump administration. You've mentioned Secretary of State Marco Rubio. How far do you expect the U.S. under Trump to go to fulfill its goal in Cuba? Would you say that a possible military escalation would be realistic?
Yeah, the military discussion is fanciful. It just we're not the Department of Defense war is not going to go into Cuba to either extract President Miguel Diaz-Canel, extract Raul Castro, who's 94 years old. Venezuela was different. Nicolas Maduro was Venezuela. Venezuela was Nicolas Maduro. He was big, physically bombastic, wore colorful costumes, sort of like a comic book character, and people knew who he was. So we kidnap him, and that is a moment. But Cuba, you don't have those personalities. Fidel Castro is dead, and so just the performative nature of this doesn't exist. In terms, though, of the hawks, as you talked about, there are, particularly in South Florida, where I was a week ago for almost a week of meetings. And I mean, there are people there who are in their 80s who fought in the Bay of Pigs invasion that was from the CIA, courtesy of the CIA, that failed miserably. And there are people who want revenge. They want their properties back. They want the communist government of Cuba gone. But having said that, including the hawks in Washington, including the hawks in the White House and on Capitol Hill and the Congress, there's also a reality that President Trump wants something, and he often will change the parameters of whatever he began with in terms of this is what I want, this is only what I'm going to accept. And then by the time we get to him using his big Sharpie, it's much different. But he can say, I did something Biden didn't do, I did something Obama didn't do, and what do you want? And I know in South Florida, the last we had these conversations, they were saying, Trump can't do this to us, and he's going to, if he doesn't stay hard on Cuba, if he doesn't support the hawks and really crack down and get rid of the communists in Cuba, rid of the regime, then South Florida may be in play. It may not be Republican, it may vote Democratic. And I said to everybody at these meetings, look, if you do that to President Trump, if you threaten him, he's going to say first, okay, I will bring Maduro back to Venezuela. And second, you can have Biden back in the White House. Is that what you want? So I think they're going to learn to go along with whatever he deems as a success. That's what everybody's going to define as a success.
John, thank you very much for joining us on Primetime and offering your insight and analysis.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, rare talks between Israel and Lebanon continue in Washington as both sides try to prevent the fragile ceasefire from collapsing. Don't go away.
Ciudad Armenia que Argentina. Empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia, from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians.
People who are financial based.
Some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso. Pashinyan is not protecting neocontrolar.
The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero.
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. U.S.-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are set to continue in Washington as Israel outlines its wider regional strategy and a new Gaza-bound flotilla leaves Turkey.
US-mediated talks between Israel and Lebanon are continuing in Washington, with both sides trying to move towards a halt in fighting after weeks of cross-border escalation. A US State Department official described Thursday's talks as productive and positive, with further discussions set to continue on Friday. Lebanon is seeking a ceasefire that Israel implements, while an Israeli government spokesperson said the talks are aimed at disarming Hezbollah and reaching a peace agreement. The Washington meetings mark the highest-level contact between Lebanon and Israel in decades, and come as a fragile ceasefire is due to expire on Sunday. Israel is also presenting its wider military operations across the region as part of a broader security strategy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would keep acting against threats while seeking cooperation with what he called moderate actors in the Middle East.
The determination to strike those who seek our lives deep within their territory, far from our borders, the buffer zones we have created around us, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, all these have changed the face of the Middle East. We will continue to fight forcefully against every threat of radical Islam. At the same time, we will expand cooperation with moderate actors in our region who have understood the advantages of extending a hand to Israel.
Meanwhile, dozens of boats from the global Sumud flotilla have departed from Marmaris in Turkey, carrying aid supplies and international activists. The flotilla is trying to reach Gaza by sea in a renewed challenge to Israel's blockade.
I would say that it's important for flotillas to continue because it holds hope, it brings a community together, and it gives visibility. It's like we might not reach, but every time something happens, like the interception, for example, it creates new awareness to new audiences.
The voyage follows an earlier attempt by the same group, which was intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters last month after setting off from Spain. More than 100 pro-Palestinian activists were taken to Crete, while 2 others were taken to Israel after being arrested.
For the first time in decades, Israeli and Lebanese officials are engaged in direct talks, but major obstacles remain between diplomacy and a lasting ceasefire. Joining us now from Amsterdam to unpack the latest developments is political and security analyst Ken van Ierland. Ken, welcome. Good to have you with us on Primetime. Now, just how significant are these direct talks taking place in Washington?
Very significant, because it's the first time in decades, since 1948, that the Israelis and the Lebanese are engaging directly with each other, and that's very important, though it is only one step ahead, because we have to solve the problem with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is the culprit that caused all the troubles. And for a very long time, and we've seen they build tunnels and storage for weapons and the entire infrastructure to threaten the Israelis already for a long time. So it's important that we make diplomatic steps, that people start, that the Lebanese and the Israelis start talking to each other, engaging with the Americans and maybe the French, because it used to be a French colony in the past. So we are making step by step ahead. We're going to look for peace in the future, though we have some speed bumps that we have to solve. And but anyway, this is very promising.
Israel has said it wants to see Hezbollah disarmed. How realistic is that in this point of time, and who could do that?
Well, we all know it's quite a challenge to disarm Hezbollah. That's the reason why, although there is a ceasefire, very fragile ceasefire, that the fighting is still going on. Hezbollah is still launching drones and trying to kill Israeli civilians, but also the military, and the Israelis are fighting back, and so it's all over and over. And step by step, the Israelis are establishing a zone, the demilitarized zone. But at the end of the day, it's going to be important that the Lebanese, although they don't have the military means to do it, that the Israelis, in conjunction maybe with the Americans, are able to disarm Hezbollah. And another fact, of course, is that Syria is not playing in this game anymore. They're not transporting any weapons to Lebanon anymore. So at the end of the day, Hezbollah gets entrenched by and surrounded by the Israelis. But that's a very very tough game because it takes time in order to disarm them. Because, they are hiding in tunnels or hiding in infrastructure. They're using the people as human shields, buildings and cities and villages as infrastructure shields. So it's a very complex game, actually, that we're going into. But the first step is they're talking to each other, and that's a major step that moving forward.
Well, with this first major step, Lebanon says it wants a halt to fighting, but Israel appears focused on what you've mentioned and some broader security guarantees. As things stand, how far apart are the two sides?
Well, still far apart, of course, because Hezbollah is a very dangerous enemy and is controlling the country. Actually, it's taking the country hostage. Well, and for Lebanon, is having peace with the Israelis from an economical point of view very, very important. But we have to dissolve this problem in one way or another.
Netanyahu, he's framing Israel's military actions as part of a wider regional strategy. What exactly does that strategy look like?
Well, it's in order to create security at the Israeli borders, at Syria. So they have an agreement, or kind of an agreement with Syria that they won't attack each other anymore. And we have peace with Jordan already and Egypt for a long time. So it's about time that we create security and peace at the Lebanese border, since there is no territorial dispute between both countries, and they have never fired a shot at each other. It has always been other players, like many years ago, Arafat and his gang created all the threats, and now it's Hezbollah already for a long time. We have seen an exchange of firefights already for decades, and it should be put to an end, because Hezbollah is controlling this country, and it's a state in a state. It's just not the Israelis that can resolve this. Yeah, maybe from a military point of view, but from a political point of view, it's the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people that should take responsibility in order to resolve this, and that's very difficult for them.
And Ken, when we speak of time, there's a deadline to a ceasefire looming here. Do you believe that these talks in Washington can help prevent another escalation?
No. We have to expect other escalations, because Hezbollah, like Hamas, same kind of people, they won't succumb, they won't capitulate and just move away. And you have to understand, it's more complex than that. Hezbollah are the Shiites, and the Shiites are Hezbollah. And that means that that's a very complex thing. It's like with Hamas in Gaza. Gaza is Hamas and Hamas is Gaza. So how are you going to resolve that? You can't kill them all. You can't just drive them out. Meaning that they're all being indoctrinated for decades, these people. And that's very difficult in order to overcome this and find a level that we can achieve the first steps in diplomacy, and that will take some time. But we can expect that at the end of the day, Hezbollah will continue to launch missiles, drones, and to kill Israelis, and the Israelis have to go into reprisals. But it's the first step. They're talking to each other. Be happy with that. But it's a very, very small step in achieving a normal relationship with Lebanon in due course.
Ken, thank you for joining us and sharing your views.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, after a short break, Donald Trump leaves Beijing after talks with Xi Jinping, but major questions remain over trade, Taiwan, and the future of U.S.-China relations. Do stay with us.
venía acá a la Argentina. Yo hice por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia from Russia. A group of Russian Armenians.
People who are financing this.
Some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso preso.
Pashinyan is not protecting neoliberal. The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero...
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Wall Street shaken to its very foundation.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. Donald Trump has left Beijing after 2 days of talks with Xi Jinping, with both sides describing the summit in positive terms. But beneath the warm language, key questions remain over trade, Iran, Taiwan, and how far China is prepared to go in turning broad understandings into concrete commitments.
US President Donald Trump has concluded his final round of talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping and departed Beijing after a 2-day summit focused on trade, security and global conflicts. The meetings took place at Zhongnanhai, the Chinese leadership compound beside the Forbidden City, where the two leaders held formal talks and toured the gardens together. Chinese state media described the visit as historic, while Trump called the talks very successful and unforgettable.
So far, we have established a new relationship between our two countries, a constructive and strategic relationship. This can be said to be a milestone visit, and we have reached many understanding on cooperative outcomes.
Trade was one of the main subjects of discussion. Trump said China had agreed to buy 200 Boeing aircraft, as well as more American agricultural products and oil. But China's foreign ministry stopped short of publicly confirming those specific deals during a briefing on Friday. The talks also covered Iran, Ukraine, rare earth exports, military communication and cooperation on law enforcement and tourism. Trump said Xi had assured him that China would not provide military equipment to Iran, and both leaders agreed that Iran should not obtain nuclear weapons.
We did discuss Iran. We feel very similar to Iran. We want that to end. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We want the straits open. We're closing it now. I mean, they closed it, and we closed it on top of them. But we want the straits open, and we want them to get it ended because it's a crazy thing. They're a little bit crazy. When it's no good, can't have it. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Taiwan remained one of the most sensitive issues during the summit. She warned that mishandling the matter could lead to conflict, while US officials later said American policy towards Taiwan had not changed. Despite warm public language from both governments, many details remain unresolved, including the scale of future Chinese energy purchases, the final terms of any Boeing agreement, and whether Beijing will play a direct role in talks with Iran.
Well, joining us now from Lisbon to take a closer look at the Trump-Xi summit is political analyst Anna Evans. Anna, welcome. Great to have you on the program. Now, with no substantive agreements on some of those key issues announced following 2 days of talks, what would you say is the main takeaway from the summit? We seem to be having some connection issues. We seem to be having some connection issues with political analyst Anna Evans. We will try to get back. Anna, can you hear me now? Okay, let's go for a short break. And when we get back, plenty more news and analysis. Don't go away.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, let's have a closer look at the results of the US-China summit in Beijing. And to do so, we're going to Lisbon and political analyst Anna Evans. Anna, welcome once again. I believe the connection issues have been resolved. Now, there hasn't been any deals on those key issues announced following the talks. What would you say is the biggest takeaway from the summit?
Well, Andy, I think this summit was, very much expected because of the much needed dialogue between the current superpower and the ascending power. And when we study international relations, we know that a superpower that sees another power ascending fast, so US versus China, that raises a number of geopolitical issues and questions that are always, at a very short distance from conflict. And so it's so important that the two great powers talk to each other. So number one, this is inevitably a result of the trip. The two, presidents have talked directly. There has been a lot of narrative and communication, and that is really important at this stage. Second takeaway from the summit, this has allowed also the two great powers to discuss about Iran and about the situation at the Hormuz Strait, which is a situation where somehow both countries have aligned interests because China depends so much on oil from the Middle East, and China, as we know, is the first oil consumer in the world. It is an avid oil consumer. And so it is of China's interest to see the Middle East situation stabilize so that it won't lose so much from having to resupply its sources of oil somewhere else, including the US itself. And so these the dialogue and talking about Hormuz and talking about other security issues, which are so important, and technological and industrial issues, all this is very important, as is the presence of the CEOs of the largest tech and financial and manufacturing firms in the US. The presence of the CEOs is really important as well in terms of interests of imports, exports, and manufacturing that again link the two countries, US and China.
Well, we've of course seen all the pleasantries, Xi saying China's door will only open wider, Trump flattering his Chinese counterpart, and so on. But how practical would you say the result of these meetings actually is? Is it perhaps the specific business delegation meetings or something else?
Well, I would say that we should see the meeting in three great pillars, which are industry, security, and energy. And so in the energy pillar, as I mentioned previously, there is an alignment of interests between the US and China in terms of resolving the Strait of Hormuz conflict, because China needs oil from the Middle East so much. So in these energy talks, and the talks on this specific subject were certainly beneficial and will allow the US to have China put some extra pressure on Iran to consensualize. But on the industry side, there have also been developments because there have been trade agreements. Now, the discussion is whether these trade agreements that are publicly known, buying soybeans, buying Boeing, Boeing equipment, and, increasing some exports and imports, the question is how much this is already expected and how much it constitutes some structural advance through dialogue. What most analysts are saying is that the trade agreements that were done during this meeting are kind of expected and not much change. And I would say that above all, it is in the realm of security that we still need to see some more advances. And why? Because the US is concerned, and with reasons to be, about China's global dominance of rare earths and its capacity to use that dominance to create and impose export restrictions of rare earths that China dominates. And these restrictions mean that the US will have trouble with its defense industry. So where is the US maintains great leverage in terms of the quantity and the quality of its defense equipments and the leverage it has at a global level, it does depend on rare earths controlled by China to be able to maintain its defense industry and expand it further. And so in these aspects of how security is related to industry, it is here that we really do not see much advance. Also, with regard to Taiwan, which, by the way, still controls advanced semi-production at level, China made it very clear that Taiwan remains a red line issue. And so, the US was a bit silent about this because the administration did not want to put further pressure at a summit of such importance. But Taiwan and the presence of the US in the Indo-Pacific remains as a critical security thorn for China, and always a preoccupation for the US. And with regard to advanced weapon races and, the space race, these are also these areas of security, which are also related again to manufacturing and to the dominion on critical raw materials, which are necessary for these, artificial intelligence-based and IT-based, very advanced weapons and defense races. Here again, we don't see much coming out of the summit. But again, what were the expectations from the start? We could not have very high expectations, and the political, nice diplomatic narratives are typical of these events.
We'll get into some of those subjects you've touched upon, but let's go first with this. She said that Taiwan is the single most important issue in US-China relations, and if handled badly, the two countries risk, as he put it, collision or conflict. Do you think this summit has eased tensions over Taiwan? Because we've just heard a few hours ago Donald Trump on the plane back to the US saying he will be thinking about those arms sales to Taiwan.
Well, yes, President Trump has kind of hinted that he would revise his approach to Taiwan and his approach in this specific matter with regard to supplying defense equipments to Taiwan. But this is a soft sentence. This is a political statement which might then not translate into reality by the time the president goes back home. Because again, until the US manages to diversify its sources of critical raw materials, rare earths, and its sources of manufacturing of advanced semiconductors, where Taiwan still holds a very important role at a global scale, until the US diversifies to other manufacturing sites, Taiwan remains as a very delicate geopolitical issue. Furthermore, even if Taiwan becomes just one out of many suppliers of semiconductors, and that will take time, still, Taiwan has a geographic position in terms of the control of the sea that is really important for China, and that also gives the US great leverage, regarding South China Sea and the region as a whole. And so, well, we can expect, that these brainstormings and meetings were important, but I would say that it remains as a long-term, issue of great importance, and whether the two powers are treading very carefully, because indeed it could lead to conflict that no one wants, neither China nor the US. And so prudence is here the golden rule ahead. Prudence.
Well, Anna, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on Primetime. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you.
All right, after a short break, leaders of Turkic states gather in Kazakhstan for an informal summit focused on artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and regional cooperation. Don't go away.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
Welcome to A-News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fear. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A-News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Leaders of the Turkic states have gathered in Kazakhstan for an informal summit focused on AI, digital transformation, and regional cooperation. A-News' Orhan Amashov is there and has sent us this report a bit earlier.
The city of Turkestan today hosted the informal summit of the heads of state of the Organization of Turkic States, with the digital transformation and AI dominating the discussions between the Turkic leaders. But of course, in the same way as modern digital technologies dominated those discussions, the blue turquoise dome of the mausoleum of Hoca Ahmet Yasavi dominates the skylines of this spiritual capital of the Turkic world. Naturally, a long way to go for the Turkic world to formulate a very unique and strong alliance, akin to many other geopolitical forces. But the fact of the matter is that many Turkic leaders, including the president of the host country, Kazakhstan, today underlined that this organization Turkish state, is not geopolitical configuration. It's not built to compete with anybody else. But the fact of the matter is that importance of OTS is increasing. It's increasing gradually on the global stage, and of course there will be certain geopolitical consequences as well. Well, today the Turkic Civilizational Center was established. To be more precise, the virtual groundbreaking ceremony of that very institution took place, with the leaders being present. It has also been mentioned that for the Turkic world to be able to be at the forefront of the digital innovation, some of the measures are to be taken, and one of those measures involve digitalization of connectivity, all the connectivity projects. President Aliyev specifically talked about extensively the cyber optic cable, which is going to be implemented between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan across the Caspian Sea very soon in the coming months as well.
Türk devletleriyle nəqliyyat sahəsində əməkdaşlığımız genişlənir.
Our interaction with the Turkic states is expanding in the transport sector. In the current global geopolitical environment, the importance of the Middle Corridor continues further. The Zangezur Corridor, which is moving toward realization, will become one of the key segments of the Middle Corridor. Customs procedures along the Middle Corridor are undergoing simplification. The e-permit system, developed within the framework of the Organization of Turkic States, enables the operative issuance of electronic permits. Dear friends, our family, the Turkic world, must grow into one of the influential geopolitical centers of the 21st century. Azerbaijan will continue to spare no effort in strengthening the organization of Turkic states.
And of course, next formal summit will take place in Turkey, as some of the developments that have taken place today here in Turkestan were in many ways preparation for that official summit as well. Azerbaijan happens to be the chairman of the Organization of Turkic States, with that chairmanship being assumed in Kampala last year, and it is likely that Azerbaijan, together with other Turkic countries, will be shaping the agenda, establishing priorities, with digitalization being at the very heart of the discussions that are to follow. Elbrus Musayev, Olkan Amashov, Turkestan, Kazakhstan, A-News.
Well, the summit in Turkestan may have been labeled informal, but the agenda was anything but symbolic. From artificial intelligence and digital sovereignty to the broader future of Turkic integration. To talk on all of that, we're joined by Professor Nurbulat Nishimbayev of the Turan University, coming to us from Almaty. Nurbulat, welcome. Great to have you on Primetime. Now, this summit focused heavily on all things AI and digital. Why would you say this has become so central for Turkic states now?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this program. Second, definitely the AI and the digital transformation is became a phenomenon of this modern period. So therefore, Central Asian states in general, Turkic states, they have made certain level of progress already, and it's better Turkic integration at the same time accelerated on digital level as well as on artificial intelligence and all other related fields, because as far as we know, all other fields became interrelated, and at certain point they depend on the AIs as well. So therefore, the topic on Turkestan unofficial summit, it highlights to which direction in general Turkic state organization are moving. The second is what kind of prospects it offers, because as far as I know, the technologies and artificial intelligence, they should be the factor to unite the states, because already we have seen within the framework of the Turkic state organization, countries are implementing laws on the AIs, on the digital transformation, because it also considers as a border. It's digital border. So therefore, I think the members of Turkic state organizations, they should have common borders first on digital areas. So because for long term it helps and it accelerates to achieve those planned goals for the long term. At the same time, we already see how the world is changing rapidly, and the technology, digital aspects is becoming as a force behind all the changes. So therefore, surely today or next time, at any time, the AIs and the digital technologies will become the key sectors. So therefore, it was one of the key development of these areas. Of course, since the foundation of this Turkish state organization, I have seen there have been a lot of things on ideological aspects, on economical aspects, but now it's very interesting to see how the member states are coordinating in all the relevant fields. Because if we see the Turkish state organization as a political institutions, definitely these institutions should need to collaborate in all the field of life at the same time in order to be on the same line with the global development.
Durbalat, we've heard the term digital sovereignty a number of times at the summit. In this, as you've described it, fast-changing world, how important is that kind of sovereignty for the Turkic world?
And definitely, that's very interesting. Also, it's became kind of problematic issues for all the nations at this time, because we used to have classical borders, and we felt when our borders are secure, we are secure. But now, the new term, digital sovereignties, digital border exists. So in order to be fully sovereign and to feel insecure, we must protect both of them. So in this regard, when it comes to Turkish state organization, definitely around 170 million population, they should have common vision when it comes to the digital sovereignties, because every day we see hackers are working across the world and billions of dollars are leaking and the data is leaking. So therefore, in order to have common security agendas, surely the state should protect and they should lay a foundation for the defense of digital sovereignties. So here is the thing I would like to mention. The first thing, when the state works on integrated projects, like international organizations or working such a kind of integrated projects, surely there will be a question, the line between the sovereignties and the actions of this work. In the case of Turkish state organization, I see all the sovereign states, they respect their sovereignty, but for the common purposes, for defending further their sovereignty, they should work together, because we share lots of things and we divide it. So we have identities which unites us. So therefore, within these identities and the common historical development, Turkic states are using for creation security on the digital areas as well. So in this regard, the digital sovereignty concept became the central point. So today, as a result of this Turkic State Organization Summit, unofficial summit, they have declared Turkestan Declaration. The key topic of Turkestan Declaration is to protect digital sovereignties and to work for common purposes, because we have seen in the last 5 years a great development of these organizations from being institutions. Now we see how the organizations expanding and working in all the fields, and we see the leaders have common vision on this one. It gives us some positive thoughts for the future.
Well, when it comes to working together, we've heard talk of concrete, specific projects. For example, Azerbaijan's president highlighted digital connectivity projects between his country and Kazakhstan. How strategically important would you say these initiatives really are?
Well, there is no words. Definitely, I see all this project which is implementing within these Turkic state organizations, they have some lifelong importance for every single member of states. So one of the aspects is digital connectivities. Usually connectivity issues had been considered over the last decade within the Trans-Caspian corridors and many others, but the point is, as I have mentioned earlier, so digital framework, application of the artificial intelligence, making it transparent and coherent and competitive across the world. It needs a strong advanced technological development, all this field. So therefore, the President Aliyev mentioned it very well that using Caspian Seas and making it not only connecting both sides, but as well as electronically, digitally providing efficient ways. So in this regard, so the trade turnovers between Asia and China, between Europe and China, definitely will increase. So the bridge will be the members of Turkic state organizations. The other point, beside connectivity issues, I would mention some security aspects, investment fund, which is starting next year. The next is humanitarian aspects, and the aspect in research and the science. So all these aspects are interrelated, but still the main areas, definitely it will be connectivities, providing with all the advanced technologies in order to rise its competence. So if you look at from the map, so one side is in Central Asia, the other side on the South Caucasus and the Turkey. It's a great Eurasian massland, which has became as a center of the powers. It also connects on the one side China with Europe. So therefore, I think the role of the Turkic state organizations is a way is not limited to the economics. It also has some strategic power in general.
Well, all this talk about all things digital and AI, the today and the tomorrow, happened in Turkestan, which itself carries deep symbolic weight for the Turkic world. Would you say that's why it was chosen as the venue? And could you tell our viewers why? What's that symbolism?
So, actually, Turkestan, definitely, as it gives its name, it's the spiritual capital of the Turkic states. So, it was a dream, actually, of our predecessors long time ago to unite the Turkic states. Unfortunately, over the last 3 centuries, we have seen how the Turkic states are divided and used to be under the different empires. But now, the Turkestan is now rising as a city because 5 years ago, by the decree of the president of Kazakhstan, Turkestan took a new status. Now, new investment came as a city, it's flourishing. But organizing the unofficial summit of the Turkic state organization is very symbolic because it's not only Kazakhstan a city from my point of view. It belongs to all the Turkic states because all the predecessors of all member states are laid down there. For example, today Uzbekistan opened their mosque on behalf of Uzbekistan in Turkestan. Also, there is an international Kazakh-Turkish university named after Koca Ahmet Yasavis. Also, today the members of Turkic state organizations opened foundation of the Turkic Civilization Center. So therefore, Turkestan will stay as a symbolic capital, spiritual capital of this integrational project. This is actually very important from the international experience because if you look at to other regional projects, having such a kind of center, it gives some values to the international organization. It gives where it was born and how long history does it have these member states. So therefore, the choice of organizing in Turkestan is not only coincidence, but I think it's a strategic turning point for all the member states of Turkic state organization.
And Nurbulat, finally, with all these summits be informal or formal talks, projects, initiatives, and so on, do you see the organization of Turkic states evolving into a compact geopolitical bloc?
That's very interesting question, to be honest, because it's still very early to say it. We see some final development form of organization, but surely comparing with the last decade, it had been great development. I think everyone agrees with me, but still early to say it became as a geopolitical bloc, like comparing with NATO, with other organizations. Because in order to create it as geopolitical bloc, I think, because comparing with other blocs, all the blocks, security blocks or geopolitical blocks, actually they will build protecting from specific forces, so having specific common issues, and the rest of the state will unite against it. But for now, what I see, there is no kind of external forces which need to be all the member states unite against it. What is the problem within the members of Turkish state organization is the first thing is economic differences on development. The second is connectivity issues. The third thing is integration within the state and removing the barriers, in particular on trades and regulation and many other aspects. But when we laid a strong foundation on economy and the social part and other parts, definitely we will. It will be easier for the long term, making it as a bloc. But for now, still we are on the process, on the way, yes, for creating it as a strong geopolitical bloc. But if we again look at the statistics, the trade turnovers and the population, it's a 178 million population, is even bigger than Russia. Territorially also compares all the part of some part of Europe one side and other part border with the China. It will become kind of definitely the centers between Europe and Asia, not only between of Europe. I think it will be the bridge which unites the two continents, kind of truly Eurasian geopolitical center.
Very interesting. Nurullah, thank you kindly for coming on Primetime and sharing your analysis.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, let's go for a short break, and when we get back, Russia says it is building a full-fledged partnership with Afghanistan's Taliban-led government, signaling deeper regional engagement with Kabul. Don't go away.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
Figura Armenia que Argentina. Empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola.
No, money from Armenia from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial based, some rich Armenians, they live in Russia.
Pashinyan lo puso preso.
Pashinyan is not protecting Nagorno-Karabakh.
The Armenian game is Russia.
No con Pashinyan mismo, pero
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabon. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting from the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Enu.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Russia says it is building what it calls a full-fledged partnership with Afghanistan's Taliban-led government. For more on that, we go to Kabul and A News' Tamim Bahis.
Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of Russia's Security Council, says Moscow is establishing a full-fledged partnership with the authorities in Afghanistan. According to Reuters, Shoigu said Russia is also encouraging other countries in the region to expand cooperation with Kabul. He said engagement with Afghanistan is important for regional security and development. Reuters reported that Shoigu described Moscow's approach as a pragmatic dialogue with the Taliban. He said that dialogue includes security, trade, culture, and humanitarian support. Shoigu made the remarks during a meeting with security officials from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Shoigu also said the organization should revive its contact group with Afghanistan. This comes as Russia has moved closer to the Taliban-led government in Kabul. Russia became the first and so far the only country to formally recognize the Islamic Emirate after the Taliban returned to power in August 2021. Moscow says cooperation with Kabul is needed because of security threats from militant groups across Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the wider region. Here in Kabul, Afghan authorities have not yet issued an official public response to Shoigu's latest remarks. However, Afghan officials have also repeatedly called on other countries to expand political and economic engagement with Afghanistan. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, nearly 5 years after the Taliban returned to power, Moscow appears to be moving beyond cautious engagement towards something far more formal. Joining us now to unpack the regional implications of the latest developments is Elham Neda, a political advocate joining us from Düsseldorf. Elham, welcome. Great to have you on the program. Now, how significant would you say that these messages from Moscow about full-fledged partnership with the Taliban are?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be there. So I would say the message from Moscow, which is coming up to the Kabul under the regime of the Taliban, it's more complicated rather than really straight. Because from one side, we see that, okay, they're willing to support the Taliban to fight the ISIS. However, they're still a terrorist group, not for Russia. They have been recognized by Russia, but internationally, they're a terrorist group, and their activities are still not legit. They don't have any kind of legitimacy inside Afghanistan as well. And under these circumstances, under different kind of like conditions in Afghanistan, of course, it's a complex story.
Well, Russia is saying this is about regional security, stability. What would you say are Moscow's actual priorities in Afghanistan right now?
So Shanghai Cooperation, exclusively Russia, most of the time they think that, okay, Taliban, they can fight ISIS, but what they're really lacking is that they don't know that the other 22 groups which are activating inside Afghanistan, for example, like East Turkestan and Islamic movement, the Turkmenistan, the Uzbekistan movement, most of them, they're related to the Taliban, and most of them, they're still activating inside Afghanistan under the control of Taliban. So for me, I think like Russia is just like playing double-sided game here. From one side, they think that, okay, it would be a kind of pressure to maintain with the West world. And from the other side, they can have a combatant like group against ISIS.
And do you believe that Russia's approach here might encourage other regional actors to deepen formal engagement with Kabul right now?
Well, to be honest, personally, I don't think so. Because, for example, if you see, there's a really high pressure on Taliban right now. Of course, they have different kind of conditions with different countries. They have different cooperation. But in the region, they cannot sustain and they cannot maintain their legitimacy without kind of having like a proper government, which can have different groups there. And in different regions, you see that, okay, they're just like willing to force people to accept their rules and regulations which they have implicated. But in the international stage, they don't have any legitimacy and they're still lacking it.
Well, the Taliban still lacks broad international recognition due to all of their policies, especially towards women and girls. Do you believe that Russia's position might risk changing the diplomatic landscape around Afghanistan?
From one side, if you see that women's situation in Afghanistan is critical, but from the other end, which Russia is, maybe they know about it, but they're not doing anything about it. As I said before, there are 22 groups, let's say like 20 plus groups activating in Afghanistan, and one of them, it's East Turkestan Islamic movement, and Russia knows about its like impact in the region, and for example, like China knows about it, and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan movements as well. So they have their training grounds inside Afghanistan. They have their kind of like camps inside Afghanistan, and which I think like it would weaken the strategy of the countries towards legitimizing a Taliban regime.
And in the long term, do you see Afghanistan possibly becoming a bigger part of a wider competition involving Russia, China, and the West?
I would say yes, because they are right now, let's accept it that they're controlling most parts of Afghanistan, but they don't have legitimacy, and there are still people that they're fighting against Taliban. But there should be a balance. I think like it's really tough for the Taliban to have a legitimate government and recognized by the international community unless they do these such things, and until they don't have kind of like legitimacy inside Afghanistan. So that's really tough for them, and that's a challenge for them still. After 4 years, we see that, okay, they are still being challenged by these kind of things, and nobody's paying attention on the security side. Of course, ISIS is a big topic, but other than ISIS, like there are, let's say, 20 more groups which no one is paying attention, or at least they're not paying attention that much deeply.
Elham, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and offering your insight.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, after a short break, we will be checking in with our correspondents across the globe. Don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Trade was a significant part in the high-level talks between Washington and Beijing, with energy deals in focus. Here's A News' Ubay Shabander with more on a potential major agreement that could reshape U.S.-China relations.
In what could be a major energy deal in the making, President Trump announced that China has agreed to buy American oil and natural gas. Trump said that Chinese vessels will soon head to the states of Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska to fill up on American energy products. China currently imports around 60% of its energy needs through the Strait of Hormuz in the Arabian Gulf. But that may soon change as President Trump seeks to close major energy deals with Beijing during his visit. U.S. energy production has increased significantly under President Trump, and the move to source U.S. energy exports to China may also put significant economic pressure on Iran, which currently is a major supplier of China's energy needs. While President Trump and Xi Jinping have publicly praised one another during this trip, reports indicate that behind closed doors, the issue of Taiwan, a self-governing island that China claims as its own, remains a sore point between the two nations. The U.S. supplies Taiwan with military support, selling billions of dollars worth of advanced military aid that could be used in case of a Chinese invasion of the island. President Trump has been mainly focusing on the economic benefits of the improved relations with China, telling reporters that President Xi has agreed to order 200 airplanes from American manufacturer Boeing. The company's CEO is among many industry leaders that has traveled with President Trump to Beijing. President Trump also said that he is encouraging China to purchase more American agricultural products, especially soybeans. American farmers could stand to gain significant financial windfalls if China becomes a major market for their goods. Mubey Shubander, A News, Washington.
Iran's parliamentary speaker has warned that the U.S. military blockade of Iran's southern ports could trigger a new global financial crisis as the Tehran-Washington standoff persists in the Strait of Hormuz. Turaj Shiralilu reports from the Iranian capital.
Iran's parliamentary speaker has warned that the United States' efforts at sustaining military escalation near the Strait of Hormuz could trigger a fresh global financial crisis. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf made the remarks in a post on X on Thursday. The Iranian parliamentary speaker quoted a breaking news on U.S. inflation rate after selling 30-year bonds at 5% yield for the first time since 2007, the year of global financial crisis. He was referring to the U.S. Navy's blockade of the Iranian southern ports and Washington's escalating standoff over Tehran's control of the Strait of Hormuz, connecting the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. Meantime, the spokesman of the judiciary, Asghar Jahangir, defended the seizure of U.S.-linked tankers, saying it was based on domestic and international law and not equal to what he branded as U.S.'s act of piracy against Iran's ships. He said in a statement on Thursday, according to the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea, a coastal state can seize ships of another country for violating domestic and international laws and regulations in its maritime territories or on the high seas. And Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who is in New Delhi to take part in the BRICS ministerial meeting, reacted to the U.S. President Donald Trump's new threat of war with Iran during his visit to Beijing. Speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the meeting, he said that the U.S. should seek a solution to its dispute with Iran somewhere other than the military arena. Iran's top diplomat said, "I hope they will put aside this rhetoric and move toward logic. They will not achieve anything from adopting this path." Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran for A News.
Political pressure is mounting in the United Kingdom, with labor divisions raising new questions over government stability after poor local election results. Our correspondent Zainab Farajzadeh has more.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing the biggest challenge to his leadership after Health Secretary Wes Streeting resigned from government and called for a leadership contest inside the Labour Party. Streeting accused the Prime Minister of political drift and a lack of direction, saying Labour now needs a broad debate about the future of the party following disastrous local election results last week. However, despite stepping down from cabinet, he stopped short of formally launching a leadership leadership bid himself. The resignation comes after days of mounting pressure on Starmer, with dozens of Labour MPs publicly calling on him to either resign or set out a timetable for his departure. But senior ministers, including Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson and Chancellor Rachel Reeves, have continued to back the Prime Minister, warning against further instability at a difficult moment for the UK economy. In a letter responding to Streeting, Starmer said he was truly sorry to see him leave government and insisted Labour must now focus on what he described as a battle for the soul of the nation. Downing Street is also trying to project a sense of normality, with the Prime Minister maintaining he intends to continue governing and fight any potential challenge. Attention is now turning to who could emerge as potential contenders if a formal leadership race begins. Former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, who today said she had been cleared of deliberate wrongdoing in a tax investigation, is being discussed as a possible candidate. Also, she has not confirmed whether she would run. Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham is also seen as a leading contender after a Labour MP announced plans to step down and potentially clear a path for his return to Westminster ahead of any leadership contest. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband is meanwhile being backed by some MPs on the soft left of the party, particularly those who want Labour to shift towards stronger state intervention and green investment policies. The growing uncertainty has already rattled financial markets, with sterling edging lower following Streeting's resignation, while business leaders want continued political turmoil could damage investor confidence in the UK. Zaina Farisata, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Experts are meeting in Baku as part of a pre-World Urban Forum event focused on sustainable urban development. The conference looks at how education, skills and innovation can strengthen cities and support long-term urban growth. Gulcin Hojalieva has the details.
Baku is hosting a major international conference on sustainable urban development, focusing on how human capital can shape the cities of the future.
The conference, jointly organised by Baku State University and the State Committee on Urban Planning and Architecture of Azerbaijan, brings together policymakers, academics and international experts as part of Baku Urban Planning Week 2026. The discussions are set against the wider framework of the World Urban Forum, which experts say is turning urban challenges into opportunities for more sustainable cities.
What the World Urban Forum brings is knowledge, is opportunities for looking at the urban issues, not only at issues, but as opportunities for the future, to build cities that are more resilient, that are more inclusive, that provide more opportunities to the people and to the youth and to everyone, most importantly.
Experts say rapid urbanization is now one of the defining global trends, with cities facing growing pressure on housing and infrastructure.
As you know, that more than half of populations of the world is living in urban areas, and in the next 50 years the world is going to be urban. As you know, the WUF 13 topic is mostly about housing, and I believe that based on this WUF 13 we will come up with a certain type of the policy recommendations how to make the housing in the world not only affordable but also resilient and more people-oriented.
In this context, the focus is on sharing experience and strengthening international cooperation in urban development.
We think that in coming years we will be able to fill some gaps in this area. Azerbaijan has a great potential and also very interesting experience in this area that can display and to share this experience with regional countries as well as at international level.
The event features panel discussions on how cities can better prepare for future challenges through education, innovation and cross-sector cooperation. Key topics include climate resilience, affordable housing, digital transformation, AI in urban governance and strengthening institutional frameworks.
Turkey has welcomed Iraq's new government led by Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi, saying it will continue to support Baghdad's stability and regional integration. The message comes at a sensitive time for both Iraq and the wider region. Adam Morrow has more.
Turkey is moving quickly to signal support for Iraq's new government. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry welcomed the new government, led by Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi, after it received a vote of confidence in Iraq's Council of Representatives and officially assumed office this week. Ankara wished al-Zaidi success in what it called his critical responsibility, voicing hope that his government would take strong steps towards ensuring Iraq's stability, prosperity, and regional integration. The ministry stressed that Turkey would continue providing support for Baghdad's efforts in this direction. For Ankara, Iraq is more than just a geographic neighbor. Rather, the country of roughly 48 million people has long been regarded as one of the most important files in Turkish regional policy. The two countries share deep historical and cultural ties, but the relationship also includes a handful of difficult issues, including border security, counterterrorism, water, energy, and trade. For years, Turkey has pushed for stronger cooperation with Baghdad against the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, while Iraq remains central to Turkish plans for regional connectivity. One major focus is the Development Road project, designed to link the Arab Gulf states to Turkey and Europe via Iraq. Water cooperation is another sensitive issue, especially in regard to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Turkey's welcoming of Iraq's new government, therefore, is both diplomatic and strategic. Ankara is signaling that it wants a stable, functioning government in Baghdad, capable of working with Turkey across a range of critical fields. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
As countries seek to strengthen energy security and cooperation on renewables, attention is turning to major projects linking the South Caucasus with European markets. At a regional summit in Athens, Georgia outlined its ambitions to become a key energy transit hub connecting the region to Europe. Nini Nikolaishvili reports.
This week in Athens, Georgia's economy minister Mariam Krivishvili joined more than 270 representatives from Southeastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean at the Energy Summit. On the same stage, the Greek Prime Minister, the Israeli President, the Gulf Cooperation Council Secretary General, and senior European Commission officials. At the ministers' panel on delivering the 2030 energy transition, Krivishvili set out Georgia's targets: 11,500 megawatts of installed capacity within 10 years, over $1 billion committed to transmission infrastructure, and a shift from energy self-sufficiency toward active electricity export. The centerpiece is the Black Sea submarine cable. The project would connect Georgia to Romania via a 1,195-kilometer underwater high-voltage line running from Anaklia to Constanta, designed to carry Azerbaijani and Georgian renewable energy directly into the EU grid. Brussels has granted it project of mutual interest status, unlocking accelerated permitting and potential co-financing. Total investment stands at around 3.5 billion euros, with grants potentially covering between 30 and 75% of costs. But the project remains in preparation. Georgia allocated 25 million gel in 2025 budget for the cable, yet only 6.5 million had been spent in the first 10 months. Construction has not begun. Georgia also sits inside the Green Energy Corridor, a regional framework spanning Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania, and Hungary, adding multilateral weight to its transit ambitions. The wider picture, however, is complicated. Georgian Dream's foreign agents law, closely modeled on Russian legislation, has been condemned by both NATO and EU officials. The government presenting Georgia as a European energy partner is the same one whose domestic track record has put that very partnership under significant strain. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Uzbek prosecutors say they have uncovered a large-scale fraud scheme linked to labor migration to South Korea, with estimated damages reaching $90 million. Sevilla Rajapova has more on that in Tashkent.
Uzbekistan's Department for Combating Economic Crime says it has uncovered several illegal schemes connected to sending Uzbek citizens to work in South Korea. According to investigators, the operation involved former employees of the Agency for External Labor Migration, now the Migration Agency, as well as representatives of private recruitment firms. Officials say members of the group illegally charged citizens between $7,000 and $12,000, promising employment opportunities in South Korea. Investigators estimate the total amount obtained through the scheme may have reached around $90 million. Authorities reported that in one case alone, more than 230 citizens paid a combined $580,000 for supposed assistance with employment abroad. In another episode, around 1,000 migrants reportedly paid $5.6 million. The Prosecutor General's office says more than 600 citizens who paid money ultimately did not travel to South Korea for work. Meanwhile, Uzbekistan has also placed former Migration Office representative to South Korea, Azizbek Toshtimirov, on an international wanted list through Interpol on fraud charges. According to the migration agency, he was dismissed in March 2025 over various violations. Authorities urge potential victims to contact law enforcement as the investigation continues. It is Civil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
And let's wrap it up with a nice story on ancient cultural heritage. More than a century after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb first captured the world's attention, new treasures from ancient Egypt are once again being brought into the spotlight in Luxor.
Egyptian authorities have unveiled two rare restored ancient tombs in Luxor, along with artifacts linked to King Tutankhamun, which have been opened to the public for the first time. At the Luxor Museum, they displayed the original plaster wall that once sealed the entrance to King Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Officials say this is a very rare item because most ancient tombs in Egypt were opened or robbed long ago, so very few original sealing walls still exist.
Today, thanks to Egyptian restorers, we've uncovered the two tombs, which are now open for visitation. They feature very important scenes from the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom.
On Luxor's west bank lies the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs and nobles of the New Kingdom were buried in rock-cut tombs. Inside the tombs, the walls show scenes of daily life in ancient Egypt: farming, harvesting crops, baking bread, making pottery, and producing wine, painting a picture of how people lived thousands of years ago.
This blocking wall is distinguished by being a unique artifact that has never been replicated anywhere else in Egypt or the world, because almost all pharaonic tombs were looted. This tomb is the only one where such a blocking wall exists, SEDA. Therefore, it is a one-of-a-kind artifact, the only one currently on display more than 100 years after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. It is the only surviving artifact of Tutankhamun that the world had never seen before.
The wall still has ancient stamps on it, showing it was part of official burial rituals. It comes from the tomb discovered in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter. Looking back through history, these discoveries remain a valuable window into Pharaoh's era in ancient Egypt.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and from all of us here at A News, have a nice evening and a nice weekend. See you Monday.